Hey everyone, and welcome back to Inside Update, brought to you by InsideInvestigator.org, nonprofit journalism to root out corruption in Connecticut. It's been another busy few weeks here, and we have three topics to talk about. Some fun ones, I think. I don't know of any other outlet writing about the funeral and death industry, and that's really where we're going to start talking about Tricia's investigation on
It's
Sunday. You're dead. Now what?
it's
Um,
just so fun.
it's a topic that's
So
relevant to
fun.
everyone.
That's
Yeah,
fair.
fun might be the word. We're also going to talk about an ongoing EV debate, so electric vehicle debate. Some folks are saying that this mandate is too much too soon. We're going to talk to Mark about his coverage and also some more recent updates since that article has already come out. And then finally, a COVID era gun rights case that was heard by an appeals court. So let's get back to the ever present topic of death. Tricia, you took a look at this. I know this was kind of a funky topic. We talked about many different avenues this could go, and you found a human angle. What was that like?
It was actually really interesting and a little bit luck of the draw. One of the things that we have to do when we're trying to find sources is just sort of like cold call people. Just reach out and be like, "Do you want to talk to me about a thing that you deal with all the time?" And sometimes they say yes, which is always very nice. And with this one, it was, trying to find funeral directors who could talk about Connecticut's laws and, the various traditions that they have to deal with. And because Connecticut is one of a few states, I think it's about 7 or 8 states in the country that mandates that all body removal and like transport has to be done by a licensed funeral director. So I knew I had to talk to a funeral director. And I happened to talk to John Carmen, who runs Carmen Funeral Homes, which is a family run business. He started doing it when he was a little kid. Helping his dad out with the business, and then he ended up going on to become like the president of the funeral director, like National Funeral Directors Association. And he was in that position when 9/11 happened, and he had to dispatch people to deal with, the fallout from that tragedy. And he talked about, his experience and his experience in Connecticut dealing with different types of funeral services. He deals with a lot of like Hindu, Indian funerals, which have different traditions than like Western, um, like Christian or Jewish or those types of traditions. So he talks about all these different things that he's had to do and the different things that he's learned along the way. And then we also got to talking about sort of the changes. Like there's a lot more cremations happening. And my thought was like, oh, well, that's because it's cheaper, right? And he's like, no, actually, it's because people want to take more time.
Huh.
Yeah, they want to take a little time to breathe, to figure out the plan, to allow relatives who are, coming from far away to come out. Or he does a lot of repatriation of remains, which sometimes requires there to be a cremation involved. And there are a lot of religious traditions that involve cremation. And the most interesting thing I think I learned from him was that it's not actually that much cheaper to do a cremation ceremony because there are a lot of other elements that people are now choosing to purchase instead. So like the cremation itself is cheaper than traditional burial, but you still have to pay for, burial plots and headstones. And now some people are adding on additional services like web streaming or more photos and videos and things like that along with the service to make the service more personal.
It's interesting when you said that people are opting for cremation to give them more time. I recall when my father passed away just a year ago. Um, it was so fast, and like that, and like
Hmm.
I sit there and I wonder, obviously, like, he was down south and everything, and my mom was they had pre-scheduled, they had made a lot of decisions before this even
Hmm.
happened because they were forward-thinking people. But I it was just, it went by so fast, and I sit there and I think, like, when you're grieving, God, that's got to be hard. It was hard, and I didn't even do all the most of the work, but it was difficult. So I can see that as being a big draw, as having that extra time.
Yeah, I thought of the similar thing, when I was talking to him about this. My father died a few years ago, and they had done a lot of the planning ahead of time, as you did. So once he passed, it was, a long battle with cancer, so it wasn't surprising. So once he actually did pass, they were able to just call the funeral director, and everything happened very quickly. It was very smooth. There wasn't a lot of stuff that we had to do we had to bring a few things to the service, and like obviously we had to go. I had to fly in, from where I was, but one of the things that it did allow was he grew up somewhere else. Like, we're here in New England, and he grew up in the Midwest. So we were able to, like a few weeks later, go to the family cemetery there and have a service with his family after having one with the local family here. So it allowed a lot of different options that, we wouldn't have had otherwise. It also was easier to do the transport because we didn't have to like ship, big crate. We were able to just take the urn with us. But obviously there were other things that we were paying for in addition to just the cremation itself. And that was the other thing. We talk about planning. He talks about how like some people don't like to plan for it, some people don't like thinking about it, and that's fine. But having some sort of plan in place is always easier on your loved ones because they are going through a grieving process, and there are a lot of choices to be made. And if you can make those choices ahead of time, it's great. He also mentioned one thing that didn't make it into the story, was that he mentioned that for some people, if you're going into hospice care or some kind of nursing home or retirement community, if you put the money aside for your funeral expenses early, it is not factored into Medicare. So your Medicare benefits are treated differently when you're going into like a hospice care or a nursing home.
That's super interesting. I feel like we need
Little tips from the inside.
yeah, anytime that we're talking about this, please consult your financial advisor or legal about your strategy. Also, yeah, legacy giving, right? That's something as a nonprofit we think about quite a bit, is how to make sure that people's wishes are carried on in a respectful way after they die. Man, yeah, there was a lot in there, and I think you did a really good job too, bringing out the human element, obviously of what he's dealing with, but some of the anecdotes in there about, hey, I'd rather be on a golf course than planning for this funeral.
Yeah.
That was really well done.
Yeah.
Let's talk about electric vehicles. This has been a hot topic for a while now, and Mark, if you could also, if you don't mind, just kind of give someone saying, too much too soon, but could you also provide the background of what folks are concerned about? What is the debate that's going on in Connecticut, just so we're not jumping in midstream?
Sure. So, I mean, I honestly think that, if this goes through, it's going to be one of the bigger ongoing stories for Connecticut in the future. I mean, it's going to be a massive infrastructure undertaking. And so what happened was back in 2004, Connecticut decided, its legislature voted to follow California's emissions regulations as opposed to the federal emission regulations. And, Connecticut's one of, I think it's like 13 or 16 states that does so. And I guess that was all well and good back then, but in 2022, California announced they were going to be phasing out the sale of new gasoline-powered vehicles. So between 2027 and I think 2040, they're going to phase out the sale of new gasoline-powered vehicles. And statutorily, Connecticut, it has to follow suit. So this issue is technically a regulation. It's going before the Regulation Review Committee on November 27th, I believe. And that is a bipartisan committee. It is split down the middle between Republicans and Democrats. And Republicans are united in not wanting this to go forward. The Regulation Review Committee could kill it. And so for this to be shot down, it would fall on at least one Democrat member. So anyway, this has obviously drummed up a lot of controversy. Whether or not, some of those controversies are, should the state be doing this in the first place? Should we be, essentially banning the sale of new gas-powered cars in the future? Do we have the infrastructure, or will we be able to have the infrastructure in time to handle this kind of electric load? I mean, testifying before the Regulation Review Committee back in August, a representative of Eversource said it'd take about $1.5 to $2.4 billion to upgrade the electrical delivery system in Connecticut. And not only that, Connecticut also has some of the highest electricity rates in the country, can you get enough energy into the Northeast to support this? Because it's not even just Connecticut. We're also Rhode Island and Massachusetts and probably New York. There's a lot of different states doing this. And then, of course, you have the arguments about, electric vehicles being more expensive in purchase price anyway. I know you make up some of that in maintenance costs. And there's, a number, battery performance. I know that's been coming up. The batteries degrade or they don't work so great in cold weather, all that kind of stuff. And so, I went out there was a press conference held by the Connecticut Energy Marketers Association. They represent the guys selling the gasoline who clearly don't want this to happen. And they were joined by the Motor Transport Association of Connecticut, which are the truckers, who also don't want to see this happen because under these guidelines, they would be forced to buy battery-powered trucks, which at this point don't go very far. They get about 300 miles on a charge. A typical diesel tractor trailer can go 1,400 miles on a single filling. So, their point was, the trucks are vastly more expensive. A typical tractor trailer is like 150 grand. Compared to an electric one, you're talking 450 to 500 range. And they're not going to be able to really go anywhere. I mean, it's one of a business owner who was there, she pointed out, she said, the big thing with environmentalists is, it's, how does it go? Reuse, recycle,
Reduce.
Reuse, recycle.
Oh, reduce. Yeah. And she goes,
reduce.
Yeah, reduce. Thank you. She's like, this doesn't reduce anything. She goes, we're going to have to make so many more trips. Plus, the weight of the battery in that truck contributes to the overall weight of the truck itself, which means they can carry fewer goods. So there's a lot at play here. And it's setting up a big political football. Primarily, like I said, Democrats have generally signaled support. There are a few on the fence. But it's really, it's a big thing for the Lamont administration. He has tried several times now to get some sort of major environmental emissions goal passed, over the finish line. Tolls was kind of related, but it wasn't really environmentally focused. But something like the Transportation Climate Initiative, which, he and the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection really pushed for, never materialized. And so this is kind of the next big thing. He sees this as a chance to kind of get this big hurdle. And part of the issue from what I've been hearing is, Democrats are a little trepidatious about giving him a big no again. After a couple of his big initiative pushes have been answered, have been met with no's. They're a little trepidatious on telling him no again. So that's where we are. And, I know, Tricia, you just watched the Republican press conference on this exact same issue. I mean, what did they have to say?
They both basically had the exact same arguments as the stakeholders, mostly because they're trying to, I think, advocate for the same issue. So like there were questions about infrastructure, there were questions about heavy duty trucks and the fact that they would be too heavy, honestly, to get across suspension bridges. There were questions about affordability, about distance that these cars can travel, battery strength, and basically the overarching argument was that we have not seen a plan for how we are going to get to this point in 2020 and 2035. So we need to see a plan because these questions are not being answered. There is no plan. We're just saying that because we have to follow California, and they want Connecticut to now switch to following the federal guidelines. Joe Biden has said that he wants half of all new vehicle purchases by 2030 to be EVs. That, of course, is going to be states with heavy EV purchasing offsetting states with low EV purchasing. If you ask me, the biggest issue, the thing that we should be focusing on in this conversation is that infrastructure update, is the fact that we do not have the infrastructure to carry a load that would power every single house in Connecticut with an EV. If you assume every single house is going to have one, of course, people can still buy used gas vehicles. If you have a registered gas vehicle in 2035, you're not going to have to throw it away and buy an EV. You can keep buying it. We'll still be selling gas. It's pushing a transition to EVs down the line. We don't have that. And I talked about in a energy story I did last year, I think. I don't remember anymore. Is that basically overall, across the board, not just in Connecticut, a push to a greener future means electrifying everything. It means switching to, heat pumps, air source heat pumps. It means switching to electric powered cars, solar power, anything that we can do to get off of fossil fuels is sort of the idea behind a greener future. But in order to do that, we need to be able to carry a load of electricity to everybody's homes, to all these businesses. So anything that we do is going to require huge infrastructure updates. And that is the thing that I think is going to loom, as you said, heavy over this entire conversation. It's not going to be as much about the cost of vehicles, which as car manufacturers push toward EVs are probably going to come down. It's not going to be the amount of charging ports, because as we have more EVs on the road, we're going to have more charging infrastructure. It incentivizes these infrastructure updates. It's going to be, can we even carry the electric load to power these cars, to make every single thing electrified? So that's going to be an interesting conversation that we have going down the line. And the board is taking it up in just a couple of weeks, and we'll see where they land, I guess.
And obviously the, environmental groups in Connecticut, of which there are many, and there's a lot of people involved with them, have been really pushing, the Democrats to get this over the line as well. So it's it's tough out there, folks. When it comes
there's a lot
to
of pressure there's a lot of pressure to get it done. And there's also, I think a lot of people, especially on the Democrat side, want Connecticut to be leading the charge in a lot of ways, no pun intended. And this would allow Connecticut to say that they are, doing the most aggressive push toward green climate infrastructure updates, whatever. So there is also that to take into account.
I want to ask one question before we move on to the COVID era gun rights case. You mentioned that the committee could kill this.
Mm-hmm.
And if they did that, does that have ramifications, or is that kind of throwing out the whole follow California standard, or is that just isolated to this one issue?
It's just isolated to this one issue. Last year, we passed a bill mandating the emissions for medium and heavy duty trucks to follow California. So there's some statutory and regulatory overlap here. But no, that would not divorce us from California. Doing that would require a legislative act by the General Assembly. I don't think if the Republicans were a majority, you could probably pull it off, but that's probably not going to happen.
I'd also encourage folks to go back. We have a deep roster of articles and investigations on the energy topic generally. In large part, thank you, Tricia, for really taking the brunt of that. There's a lot of information from the last couple of years to bring yourself up to speed, but also to look at a lot of these issues in a more granular way. If it's all right with everyone, I want to move on to this last topic, and that is, Catherine, could you bring us up to date on this? We're going back to an issue during COVID involving gun rights, and I actually did have the chance to listen to some of this as well this morning, but you were listening live as it unfolded, as I understand it.
Yeah, so this is sort of a really bizarre case, not in the least because, as you mentioned, Connor, this is a COVID era case about, it's the Connecticut Citizens Defense League, which is a gun rights advocacy group in the state, and a number of individual plaintiffs who are basically charging that their Second Amendment rights were violated because during the pandemic, the processing for firearm permit applications, which is the first step in getting a gun in Connecticut, is you need to get fingerprinted at your local police department before you can get a municipal permit to have a firearm, before you can get a statewide permit to have a firearm for personal defense, in your home or something like that. So because, COVID happened and, a lot of town processes either shut down or were so limited to the point where things were being processed at much slower rates than we normally would expect. CCDL and these plaintiffs are alleging that their Second Amendment rights were violated by a number of towns in Connecticut. CCDL is also saying that basically because they had to, take a number of issues to court and help these plaintiffs with legal help, that their organization was harmed as well. I have to say, based on the oral arguments, I don't know if this was your takeaway, Connor, but I don't think this looks great for these organizations. The case has already been dismissed from a lower level court, and yesterday's oral arguments were basically about whether or not it should be taken up again and go forward. Frankly, I don't think the panel of justices that heard the case were very persuaded by their arguments, because again, most of these or at least the three individuals who are the feature plaintiffs in this case have since been able to get gun permits because they did qualify for them. The issue was just, the slowdown during COVID. But, other than that, I think the really interesting part of this case is that there is a qualified immunity defense from the town officials who are named as the defendants here. Of course, qualified immunity, I think we're all pretty familiar with as a Supreme Court doctrine that they basically invented that says that government officials are immune from prosecution and claims of harm from citizens if they violate their liberties or their rights in some way, in a way where they have to apply discretion and they are then reasonably protected. Obviously, we hear that a lot in cases where, cops step over the line and do harms to citizens. But in this case, the government officials, which are namely the police chiefs in the towns that are named in the lawsuit, are claiming qualified immunity as a defense. And that is interesting because even if this case were to go forward on the merits, and again, I don't think it's going to, one of the issues here is, if you're a law-abiding citizen and you otherwise qualify for the ability to get a gun permit, what is the length of time in which government has to do that before they have infringed on your rights? A lot of the big gun rights cases that have come out of the Supreme Court in recent years don't touch on that at all. So that potentially could be something that would be decided here if the case were to go forward on the merits. However, because we have a qualified immunity defense from the defendants in this case, that would kind of just shut the case down. And that actual, justiciable argument is something that probably wouldn't be answered even if it went forward in the courts.
I have to say, I don't think I've seen a single lawsuit related to what was done during the pandemic actually succeed in Connecticut. I think there's been some successes in other states. Like I think, New York had to hire back a bunch of people they fired for not getting the vaccine or something like that. But in Connecticut, I mean, there were challenges over the business shutdown. There were challenges over, vaccination requirements, and all of them just got shut down. So yeah, I mean, and this one got shut down initially. So yeah, I think it's probably a long shot. It doesn't seem like any of those COVID cases, those COVID lawsuits have ever gone anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. The police powers that states have during times of emergency give them quite a bit of latitude. So, a lot of claims of harm aren't necessarily heard or aren't necessarily successful. The other element to this case is most of these individuals now have gun permits. So any harm that potentially was done to them is now basically moot.
Gotcha.
There's also, Catherine, I agree with you. The judges were very quick to interject throughout the oral arguments. They were, all over these attorneys trying to make sure that their points were clear. So I didn't see a particular path forward there. The qualified immunity thing, though, is fascinating. I feel like maybe we should have an attorney on staff, but then I hear Catherine start to get into some of these cases, and I'm like, nah, we're good. We're fine. We can deal with the contractors that we have for our legal team right now, and we're covered across the board. So
she's got it. She's got it. She's got it.
No, we'll have appreciate her, that analysis.
We'll have her argue for us in front of court.
All right, glad that political science degree is doing something.
There we go. Absolutely. Wonderful. Cool. Anything else topics wise? We're obviously headed into the holiday season here. This is probably one of the most important times of the year for nonprofit newsrooms, nonprofits generally, but we're in the news and journalism business. For all of you listening, of course, your support is what allows us to hire new talent, to produce great journalism, to keep you informed about what's going on in Connecticut. please consider donating by going to insideinvestigator.org/donate. Make sure that all of these wonderful writers are being supported by the infrastructure to allow their work to reach the masses. It is greatly appreciated to all of you who are subscribers, donors, and otherwise help us spread these articles far and wide. Not hearing anything else. If there are other topics, speak up now, because I'm about to wrap up.
I think I'm good.
For watching the Inside Update. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and until then, be well, stay safe, and stay informed.